There's a power within you. It lifts your life to its highest level. It brings success, companionship, happiness, health, and peace of mind. As you tap into this power, it will respond to you because this power is within you. And that's why spirituality rocks. Welcome. I'm your host, Janine Burns, with another fantastic episode of Spirituality Rocks. I'm excited to tell you that our website has launched. You can check us out at spiritualityrockstv.com. That's spiritualityrockstv.com. You can find out more about New Thought. You can find out about New Thought in your area. And we're going to address that specifically today with my guest. We're going to be talking about New Thought. And I want to, just a little homework, if you will, and not homework, announcements actually. Check out Women's Gold Rush, women'sgoldrushconference.com. Women's Gold Rush, it is in Chicago. It is held March 13th to the 16th. It's fantastic. There's a lineup of incredible speakers from Terry Cole Whitaker, Sheila McKeithen, Jackie Trish Atkins, Sonny Bohm, and the list goes on and on. I'll be on that show as well. I will be speaking as well as that conference, and I really look forward to it. Also, there's a cruise coming with the affiliated New Thought Network. It is a cruise in consciousness. That is in April 16th to the 20th, and you can check that out at newthought.org. That's newthought.org. Okay, let's jump right in. And rather than the typical beginning of the show, I'm going to have a conversation with my guest, and we're going to talk about New Thought. My guest is Reverend Will Mercer. Reverend Will Mercer is not new to New Thought at all because, in fact, he was a young man when he first was introduced to it, but I'm going to let him tell you about that. He's written this really great book, which I really believe is destined to become a classic in New Thought because it talks about the origins and the beginnings of New Thought, and it's quite a fascinating read. It's called Present at the Beginning, and I'd like to welcome to Spirituality Rocks the Reverend Dr. Will Mercer. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Janine. Thank you for inviting me.
It's a pleasure to have you in studio. So tell us about your first introduction to New Thought.
Well, I was 12 years old, and my great aunt, who I did not know was a New Thought devotee, sent me a subscription for Daily Word, which is the Unity publication. And through the years, although I did my best to avoid it, she rained a whole lot of New Thought on me. And there came a point in my life where all of the materials that she'd been sending me through the years just seemed to come together. I had moved to Arizona, I was sorting through boxes, and everything my Aunt Ruth had given me was starting to show up. Oh. And including materials that were written by Erwin Edwin Gregg, who was second generation divine science minister. And so it became a great source of interest to me, and it was a place where I always kind of went for refuge. You know, when there were critical issues that came up in my life, I would find myself gravitating back to New Thought.
Reading the materials.
Reading the materials, attending church. Okay. I remember when 9/11 hit, that was a real important time for me in going back to church. And in my mid-50s, when I moved to Phoenix, Arizona, everything started to gel in a very unknown way to me. I met Flo Dibley, an old Unity teacher who became one of my first teachers. She, in turn, introduced me to Blaine Mays, and the rest simply became a process of epiphanation, as I put it, where I was just constantly receiving messages about what it was I needed to do.
Receiving divine guidance, when you say receiving
divine
messages.
Guidance, yes.
Yeah, we just want some clarity there, you know. And so let's define New Thought for the people. How do you define New Thought?
Well, I would define it in two ways.
Okay.
First of all, Emmett Fox called it a back to Jesus movement.
A modern back to Jesus movement, okay.
Yeah, the concept being that Jesus in his time did not have all the institutional church around him. And he was very much a direct player with the people. And he was a healer. So New Thought from the standpoint of what Jesus was doing before he ascended was direct healing. He never asked a diagnosis. He never did anything to find out what the problem was. He simply said, pick up your bed and walk.
Right.
That would be one definition. The second definition, which is very closely related, is that when New Thought came to be in the late 1800s, it was a healing movement. Almost all of the people who come to New Thought or brought about New Thought, I should say, like Quimby, like Mary Baker Eddy, like Emma Curtis Hopkins, and then Melinda Kramer, were all focused on what they called healing or Christian healing. And in fact, Melinda coined the term, I believe, the Christ method of healing.
Right, right. And so in New Thought, I like to call it practical spirituality. We teach that there's one presence in power, one power that is omnipresent. We teach that thoughts held in mind produce after their kind. We don't teach that it's our casual thoughts. We teach that thoughts are creative according to the strength and desire behind the thought, and that they literally form a pattern in the subconscious mind, and through the law of mind, which is how God works, the action of God, our experiences are created from that. So that's what we teach. And in your book, Present at the Beginning, you have so much materials to support this. Now, New Thought is also a denomination. We have the big three in New Thought is Unity, what's now called Centers for Spiritual Living, and then the Divine Science Federation. And so New Thought then, as a denomination, encompasses all those three. In Present at the Beginning, you address what happened back in the 1800s. And like I said, I really believe this is destined to be a classic in New Thought because of the history involved in it and the tedious, the energy and the time that you took to transcribe some of the works. It's really absolutely remarkable. And so what I'd like to do is jump in at the beginning. And the beginning that I'd like to jump in at is you giving a talk. You gave a talk at the International New Thought Alliance. It was last year. Was it last year?
Year before last.
It was a year before? Time sure flies.
Yeah.
And you spoke. Tell us about what you spoke about. It's better for you to summarize it.
Well, the first time that I did it for INTA, it was part of a symposium on healing that I had put together as president of the Federation to bring people from all of the sub-denominations, if you will, of New Thought, including Universal Foundation for Better Living, Unity, Religious Science, or Centers for Spiritual Living, and Divine Science, to talk about that common heritage, because all of us grew up out of that healing process. So in order to introduce the whole symposium, I did a fair amount of research so that I could do essentially an extemporaneous presentation about history of New Thought. And it became a source of interest to some people who kept telling me that they wanted a copy of it in print. And I gave a similar kind of presentation the following year at the Divine Science Federation Conference, which was this past summer, or 14, I should say. And this was a remarkable, it had a remarkable reception. And as a result, I was urged by Tim Stewart, who's our current president of the Federation, to write it. Write it. And so I sat down to do that and then realized that the work that I had been doing with some of Melinda's notes, or Fanny James' notes, fit together to allow the book to not only present a history, but also some material that's really been totally unknown to New Thought historians.
Right.
And that was this foundational teaching.
Yeah, and I was really pleased to read in your book things that I didn't know about the history of the New Thought. Now, you mentioned Tim Stewart, the current president. He's been on the show of the Divine Science Federation, and you just recently retired as the past president. But, you know, I really think Divine Science is making a huge resurgence. That's what we spoke about, and I think that this book is really going to cement that. And one thing I'd like people to know that I really enjoy about Divine Science is I get the daily At-One-ment, which is a daily reading. I really like that daily reading. Yeah. It's fantastic. How can people get that?
Well, you can go to the Federation website, which is divinesciencefederation.org.
Okay.
And you can sign up to receive it. You'll also find on that website calendar pages that will allow you to go to the daily message if you don't receive it in your email. But they went a step further in producing it on a daily basis through one of the MailChimp systems that are used, and it is marvelous. And
great.
It's spurring a whole lot of additional interest in Divine Science.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And you know, I used to comment on this. You know, you mentioned before about the history of the New Thought movement and how Emmett Fox referred to it as, you know, reborn Christianity renewed, if you will, on the teachings of Jesus. And my background is in science of mind, religious science. But I used to speak at the UFBL centers at Mary Tumpkin, et cetera, a good close friend of the UFBL. And I always found it fascinating that people would kind of gloss over in the Science of Mind textbook the chapters on the teachings of Jesus, which just astonished me how that didn't really make any sense to me at all. And what I love here in reading this is that you embrace it, that you embrace the Bible study. There's all sorts of chapters in here written by Mrs. Kramer and about you know, the Godhead and about baptism and all religious things. And so it's time for a commercial break. But when we come back, I want to jump into the book and I want to talk about more about where this came about. So don't go far. We've got more with the Reverend Dr. Will Mercer and his book, Present at the Beginning, with Spirituality Rocks.
Stretching under sedation or manipulation under anesthesia is a very gentle, very precise procedure to very slowly release any scar tissue that is formed as a result of a traumatic injury. Many people ask, how does this work? Will I get hurt? Will you stretch me too far? We only stretch the body part to its normal range of motion. After completing the post-MUA rehabilitation program, it's very common that our patients say to us, hey, I can play ball with my kid again. Hey, I can bowl again. Hey, I can enjoy hiking again. This is what makes it rewarding to us as practitioners.
We're going to do a live commercial. Hi, I'm Renee Marie. I'm the president of Language of Love Incorporated Foundation. I'm really happy to tell you that we're going to be doing a Language of Love telethon on March 29, 2015 from 2 p.m. to 8 p.m. Please look for the location on my website, reneemarielanguageoflove.org. And once again, it's reneemarielanguageoflove.org. And the show will be hosted on the Madhouse TV. It really is important for you to be aware of strokes and aphasia. Strokes is the third leading cause of death in America and the first leading cause of disability. And it really is something that plays no favoritism. And it also really comes when you're not expecting. Nobody expects to have a stroke and nobody expects to suffer from aphasia. And it really does make a huge impact in your life and change your life in one split second. So we look forward to having everyone join us once again on March 29, 2015 from 2 p.m. to 8 p.m. And you can follow us on reneemarielanguageoflove.org. Once again, it's reneemarielanguageoflove.org. And we look forward to seeing you. God bless.
Hi there, I'm Dr. Janine Burns. I teach practical spirituality on Spirituality Rocks. Delighted to be here today with the Reverend Dr. Will Mercer, who wrote this book, Present at the Beginning. Melinda Kramer, Fannie James, and the story of Infinite Spirit. This is a story that's waited 125 years to be revealed. And so my question is, where'd you find this material? There's stuff in this book that I've never even heard of. And I've been in New Thought for a long time. Where'd you tell me more?
Let me give you a bit of a time frame because
Okay.
I think you need that to understand.
Okay, cool.
Melinda heals herself in about 1885.
Right.
She starts treating and healing other people in her San Francisco neighborhood shortly thereafter.
Who did Melinda study with that she learned these healing principles?
Well, she was born into the Quaker faith,
Okay.
and so there was a background for her of going into the silence.
Okay.
Now, she will maintain, and does in a number of documents, that there was no influence from anyone else. I have to honestly say, forgive me, Melinda, there were some other influences. The year before she opened home college and started writing the Harmony magazine, she worked for a magazine called The Gnostic in San Francisco. And all correspondence for The Gnostic was to be directed to a woman named Melinda Kramer.
Oh.
So there was a lot of influence around theosophy and those kinds of occult studies, which were not occult in the sense that we sometimes attribute around negativity,
Right.
but in fact hidden information that was only becoming exposed at certain points. So in any event, the Gnostic magazine goes away in July of 1888. Interestingly, Melinda's Harmony magazine begins in October of that same year. But saying that as kind of background, she begins to be invited to teach elsewhere. A student of Emma Curtis Hopkins named Mary Fisk, who lived in Denver, approaches Melinda in the fall of 1889 and says, "We'd love to have you come to Denver and teach, bring your lessons." So by February of 1890, this is when she makes her first trip out of San Francisco to teach. The timing of the events that occur from 1890 to about 1895 are so tight that the only opportunity that Fanny Brooks James had to receive these lessons was in 1890. Melinda was back the next year, but these notes are from that first class.
The notes in your book. Mm-hmm.
So they represent, from my vantage point, the real foundational teaching of divine science. Here was a woman who was coming in from out of town, presenting a whole new theological concept, and so why would she not have produced that which was most critical to the understanding of her message than to create this set of lessons that were actually the main point of divine science, which leans on two things. One is that the term science, which causes some difficulty a century later.
A century later, right, but not then.
Not then. Really relates to her view that, like mathematics, which was treated as a science in those days, there was a reliability about spirituality, that 2 and 2 is always 4 in mathematics. Well, if you follow that same principle with unchangeable truth and inalterable principle, you find that it has that same reliable outcome.
I remember reading that in your book. You addressed that. Okay.
So that was one of her main points. The other is her most famous finding or discovery, if you will, and that is the law of expression, which is what she's best known for. And that is that like produces like. So an orange is not going to grow from a lemon tree.
Okay.
And if we are made in the image and likeness of God, then we too have God within us. And that is the basis for the omnipresence that we hold at the center of our faith, which says that God is everywhere. So how can God not be a part of us,
Right.
as well as everything around us?
Okay. Right. Makes sense. It
Yeah.
makes sense. And so, where did you find the material? I mean, I'm just like, where did you go to libraries? Did you travel across the country? Did you go to Denver? Where'd you get materials?
Well, when I was elected president of the Federation, it was my goal to produce a calendar that would bring back the faces and names of the past that people had forgotten or not been aware of. So I took the opportunity to go to our headquarters in Rutland, Vermont, and go through our archives to find out what it was we had. Now, there were a lot of things that were just simply paper that needs to be disposed of at some point, Tim. But a lot of it was old materials that no one had looked at for probably 30, 40 years or more. And I picked up this notebook, which I have in my hands, and started to look in the front of it and saw Mrs. Kramer's name and saw some references to Fanny James farther into the notebook. And I thought, well, this is interesting. I think I'll take this home and take a look at it.
Uh-huh.
And so I did, and in reading it, I realized that it was probably the finest set of full sentence notes that any student had ever taken in a class that I could be aware of. And I've gone all the way through law school, so I know what it is to take solid notes. And these were simply remarkable. I mentioned to you a bit ago that I think some of that may have come from the fact that Spencerian shorthand was very popular in that day, and it may have been that she would take all of her notes through the day, and then in the evening following the classes, put together a very careful set of notes.
Yeah, it had to be, because I remember in reading it, because you do have some pages in here and you have exact notes, and I remember reading it going, how could somebody take such significant notes? And so it had to be that way.
Yeah.
So then you were just sort of rooting through drawers, and you found...
Oh, there were other things that turned up. I found Melinda Kramer's signed ordination certificate for Nona Brooks, which was all folded up in a weird little kind of folder. Found a number of historic pictures that we had not looked at for many, many years. And through the process of being the president of the Federation at that time, invited people who were still grandchildren of people who'd been present at the beginning to send their materials into us as well.
Wonderful. How did that work for you?
Worked marvelously.
Really? Marvelously. Ooh, good use of an adverb. Like that a lot. You're kidding. So you just got a whole bunch of material directly.
You know, a lot of it was books that were copies that we had, books that we had copies of, but they were also autographed editions in some cases. And then in several cases, they were the actual original notes of the grandmother in this case, or great-grandmother, Alice Ritchie, who was one of Nona's first students, and we have a full set of her notes as well.
That is spectacular.
It's kind of unheard of that these materials would survive this long, but I think that we believe in divine science, and I think in most of New Thought, that nothing is lost in spirit. And Melinda Kramer was a character who pretty much disappeared after the earthquake in San Francisco in 1906, which ultimately took her life.
Well, and then also it took her work as well. I remember reading the book.
Burned it to the ground.
Yeah.
Burned everything she had. And apparently there were things that existed nowhere else.
Right.
So she became a footnote. The people who survived get to write the history. So Nona Brooks and others who were around in later years would acknowledge Mrs. Kramer, but really didn't give her very much notoriety.
Right.
So about 25 years ago, the whole process began to pull together a full set of her Harmony magazines, which ran from 1888 through April of 1906. And that, I think, was regarded as the capstone of Melinda's materials. They thought we would find nothing more.
But you did find the...
Well, we found these notes.
And these notes.
And because of the nature of technological research today...
Yes.
I have also been able to uncover some materials that are going to be part of a second book, which actually bring her voice, her extemporaneous talk about her own healing to the surface. These were two testimonial meetings that she participated in Washington, D.C.
And you have the audio.
I don't have the audio. There's no actual voice. But what it is shorthand recordings of a testimonial meeting involving 5 or 6 different people.
Wow.
And she simply gets up and tells her story.
Cool.
Well, when we stand up and tell our story, it's different than what we might write.
Right.
And the truth of what is coming about is the human quality of Melinda is really breaking through in a way that I don't think we've felt before.
Oh, that's
She's
great.
always been this kind of austere figure with very interesting hairdos and so on, but it's been hard to crack beyond the edited work to find out more about who she was. And these 2 segments of testimonial meeting, which I'm going to be able to produce shortly, add so much color to the information that we've already had that it really creates a much stronger sense for who she was as a woman and all the great work that she did.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So let's talk about some of the meat, if you will, in the book. There's so many things that I found significant. I really liked when I was reading about the omnipresence of God. Can you talk about that, or what really moved you?
Well, I think for me it was the discovery of the nature of these teachings and how she built them. Because she was dealing with a room full of students that had, in some cases, no exposure to what we call New Thought at all. But these were seekers, much as we have seekers today, who wanted to find out how to have a closer relationship with the God of their fathers. And what they found from Melinda was that God indeed did reside within, because she talks about omnipresence and omnipotence and omniscience and omniaction. All of these concepts that involve the wholeness of God as it appears in each of our lives.
Indeed. And so, as you go through the book, there's actually, you have it labeled and numbered so clearly that you can pick up really significant points. Talk to us about this idea of the Christ consciousness, because there was a good section about that. When people, what it means in New Thought when we talk about the Christ nature.
Well, the Christ nature relates to the fact that Jesus is the great example of the Christed behavior, Christ being a term that could be applied universally. It could be Buddha the Christ. It could be Muhammad the Christ. The concept is that you walk the talk. And so what Melinda did for us was lay that out in a way that allows us to all understand that we are all capable of Christ consciousness. It is a matter of where our own individual consciousness lies at any given point, and what it is that we must do to raise that consciousness to have a greater appreciation not only for the world around us, but for ourselves.
And what about the bread of life? Tell us about the bread of life.
Well, the bread of life has most to do with the fact that the materials that come from God come to us in a way that is intended for us to be able to appreciate and absorb and make use of all of the lessons that lie out there. So bread of life, it refers in this case to the teaching that comes directly from God that becomes our food, if you will, for spiritual growth.
That reminds me of meditation.
Sure.
And I know that when you were working on this material, and I'm sure you meditate regularly, that's one of the foundations of New Thought, is we teach to go within so that you can have a personal relationship with this indwelling presence and a connection. And then all of a sudden when you do, you just really awaken greater divine ideas, greater synchronicity, finding yourself in the right place at the right time. But I think a lot of it is greater and greater divine guidance. How often do you meditate?
It's a daily practice for me. Doesn't always hit the same time of the day.
Okay.
One of the things, though, that I found necessary for myself as I did this book was to have a candle lit on my desk during the time that I was working with these materials, because I could actually feel something different moving in the room when I was working on the notes. When I'm writing my history, that's one thing. That's being sure I've got my dates correct and my facts correct and so on.
Right.
But when you delve into the study, the lessons themselves, you could literally hear her. She was a shy woman. She was very demure in the way that she presented herself. And this voice just kept echoing in my head when I first began the work. And then I realized that I had to somehow hold the light for myself while I did this work. So I brought a candle to my desk, and it gets lit every time I sit down to do any of this.
Good idea. It reminds you of the light within.
It does.
That's fantastic. Okay, another quick break, and then don't go far away because we're going to be back with more Present at the Beginning. By the way, the website is www.presentatthebeginning.com. Be right back.
My name is Dr. Robert Brevard. I'm here for Multi-Medicine in Westbury, New York. We're located at 1065 Old Country Road, Suite 214. Been here for about 15 years. The practice has medical doctors, physical therapists, chiropractors, acupuncturists. We also do pain management, and we have orthopedists on staff. Here at Advanced Multi-Medicine Rehabilitation, we've got physical therapists on staff who treat an array of conditions, from neck pain to back pain, shoulder pain. We treat carpal tunnel. We treat a lot of car accident patients, slip and falls. We treat patients with knee injuries, with ankle injuries. We have state-of-the-art equipment. We've been here for over 15 years. Vast array of diagnostic testing, from x-rays to EMGs. What is an EMG? It's a diagnostic test that allows a doctor to determine where the pinched nerve is. Cora is a physical therapist at Advanced Multi-Medicine and Rehabilitation. She's working on Stephanie, who was involved recently in an automobile accident. Stephanie has tight thoracic and cervical musculature, and Cora is doing some myofascial release work and some therapeutic stretching, doing it to help her with her pain. Vicky is also a patient here at Advanced Multi-Medicine and Rehabilitation. Vicky is now working her leg muscles, specifically her quadricep muscles, trying to strengthen them after an injury she sustained. If you find yourself in need of any type of physical therapy, please don't hesitate to call Advanced Multi-Medicine and Rehabilitation, located in Westbury, New York, in Suite 214. Phone number is 516-334-7000, or find us on our website at advancedmultimedicine.com.
Stop the truck! Stop the truck! Thank you.
Welcome back to Spirituality Rocks. I'm your host, Janine Burns. I want to remind you to check out our website, www.spiritualityrockstv.com. We recently went live, and there's some good information on that website. I also want to remind you to check out the Cruise in Consciousness. That's www.newthought.org. We are cruising to Cozumel April 16th. The Reverend Dr. Sheila McKeithen, who's the new president of the Universal Foundation for a Better Living, is going to be our keynote speaker. So that's going to be a lot of fun. So we are in the studio in lovely Deer Park, Long Island. I want to give a shout out to Janine Zarelli and Tommy Marr, our sound engineer and producers for the show. And I'm in the studio. Reverend Will drove out from New York City. Welcome back to Spirituality Rocks.
Thank you.
Loving your book, Present at the Beginning. And you know, one thing that I kind of noticed, if you read the book and you read the ideas and then you read Eckhart Tolle, there's a lot of similarities there. I can't help but think that Eckhart Tolle read this before he did his work.
Well, and other materials like it.
Other very similar materials like it.
I have a recording of a interview that he gave at Unity Village about 7 or 8 years ago. And I was fascinated by what he was talking about, that heaven and hell were not destinations, and that
they're states of consciousness,
thought forms and things of that kind. And I thought, wow, this is really interesting material. And then I started reading a fair amount of Frank Whitney, who's an old Unity author. And then I started reading more deeply into Melinda's work and into the work of Fanny James. They were talking about hell being a man-made proposition on Earth that far back. So I think that one of the feelings that a lot of people in New Thought have, and I don't necessarily share it, is that you've got to have these materials translated into some kind of modern jargon to be acceptable to today's population. And my belief is that the most direct messages still come to us from the founding writers. So when I read Tolle and enjoy reading Tolle, but then I run across a phrase or a concept, I can pretty well tell where it came from. It's usually far back.
It's usually very far back. And, you know, the materials in this book, it's not a difficult read. I mean, it's very, you know, to make the language more modern, I think maybe, you know, sometimes people like to make it gender-free, but otherwise, the writings are very modern. Okay, so you found all the material, you were searching around in the drawers, you found those, and you were like, wow, I found the history of New Thought. So what's the gap there? What prompted you to actually write it up and put it all together?
Well, I had transcribed Fanny's notes of Melinda's normal classes and was continuing to work with those just to be sure I had not missed anything and it was well done. And then combined with this presentation that I've made periodically about the history of New Thought, when I ended my term as president of the Federation, Tim was saying, you need to write this, you need to put this down on paper. And so I finally had the clarity, and my wife had been saying that to me as well, but I kept saying, leave me alone, I'll write when I'm ready to write.
It's different when your wife tells you, apparently. Okay, go ahead.
But they're credited with, you know,
Good.
putting the energy in me to do it. But the reality is that these two stories, this history of New Thought and this set of foundational lessons, just fit together like hand and glove.
Oh, absolutely. Tell us about the law of expression.
Well, the law of expression is fairly simple, and that is that like produces like. Mm-hmm. That means that if we are created in the image and likeness of God, and God is omnipresent, that we cannot but have God in us. That we have not just a divine spark, but in fact, God resides within us. We are the only way that God can experience human life on this earth that exists. So he expresses through us. Each one of us has that spark, no matter what you may think about the neighbor playing loud music late at night. It's just that God is expressing in those people in a different way than he does through us.
So you're saying that God knows itself by means of its creation?
Yes. I would say that God knows itself, or Spirit knows itself, by the experience of human life. It's a little bit difficult to know a whole lot about life as a rock or as a piece of wood. But those are other expressions of God, that universal presence that is all around us and is through everything. But this human expression, which allows us to write books, to have conversations, to share thoughts and ideas, is uniquely human.
Right.
And therefore it becomes a means of giving God an outlet for the very important lessons that he has to teach us.
One thing I found interesting, so back in the late 1800s, there was Christian Science, there was Mary Baker Eddy, and then Emma Curtis Hopkins was working with Mary Baker Eddy. Mm-hmm. And then what happened there?
She got canned.
She got canned because?
She had the temerity to suggest around September of 1885, while she was doing this editing job, that there were other voices that had credence in New Thought. And Mary Baker Eddy was very intransigent about the idea that she was the be-all and end-all of spiritual thought. So once you crossed her path in that way, you were exiled. And so Emma Curtis Hopkins was exiled from that job, landed very quickly 4 months later in Chicago with her own metaphysical association and college, and she began the process of teaching Christian Science, but from her vantage point, which was without many of the strictures that Mary Baker Eddy placed on Christian Science.
The restrictions, exactly. And so then she became known as the teacher of teachers.
Correct.
And who did she teach?
Oh, there's a whole list. The names that would probably be most familiar would be Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, Annie Ricks Millets, Helen Wilmans, Mary Fisk. There was a whole, there are probably 2 pages of names of people that she'd actually ordained.
Did she teach Ernest Holmes?
She did, but that was a later part of her life. She lived until April of 1925, and Ernest Holmes was her last student in 1924.
And I believe then it was in 1926 that he wrote the book. Matter of fact, I know it was that he
Yeah.
wrote the book Science of Mind.
Correct.
So she had a profound influence upon him. I think she also taught Joseph Murphy.
May have. That's not coming to mind real
Yeah, I
quickly.
somehow recall reading that. So isn't that wonderful? You know, it's one thing I noticed, and that is in the book, that back in the day, they all supported each other. You had the appendix of the book is great because you have pictures, you have diagrams, and you can actually look at it yourself and study it. And I think that's so fascinating. And what I thought was really wonderful is back in the day, they all supported one another. You had an incident here where I think it was it Fanny who was hanging out with the Fillmores?
Well, no, let me,
Who was that?
Let me clarify that for
Please
you.
do.
Pueblo, Colorado in the 1880s was a boom and bust economy.
Right.
Charles Fillmore was a real estate man. He moved
Yes.
from another location to Pueblo, Colorado. He went into the real estate and insurance business with a man named Charles Small. Charles Small happens to have married Alethea Brooks,
Right.
Nona Brooks' younger sister. Or Nona Brooks' older sister.
Older sister. Alethea was the oldest, right?
She was the oldest. So there was a strong collegial relationship between these people because they knew one another in Pueblo, family to family. And I point out in the book that it wouldn't surprise me at all if they spent Sunday afternoons at the dining table talking about things
Right.
like spiritualism and the topics of the day. And then we find Melinda separately developing a relationship with the Fillmores as she began to travel east. So this is where the kind of confluence of all these relationships becomes very warm and very collegial. Melinda was famous for not bothering about copyrights or anything having to do with any kind of exclusive right to thought and concept. And so as a result, she freely shared her materials, which is another reason why you find common language developing within New Thought. She promoted that not only with her own personality, but she also developed the International Divine Science Association, which was a precursor to INTA, or the International New Thought Alliance, which she hosted 5 conferences between 1894 and 1899 with the sole purpose of sharing New Thought concepts and creating a common base for the denomination to move forward.
Which is a wonderful thing because in subsequent years it seemed like sort of, I don't know if ego got involved, but people were very concerned about what they were teaching, and it became a little more separate, and which was quite disconcerting. And then it's to the point now where there's a lot of people teaching what we call New Thought. They don't maybe not use those terms. There's a lot of people teaching practical spirituality out there.
Oh, there are. And you're right, the movement really didn't become proprietary until around the time or after Melinda's death in 1906. That's when you see unity become fully enclosed in its own
Cohesive, right.
organization. We're still 20 years away from religious science coming on the scene. Nona Brooks is developing what remains of divine science in Denver, having lost Melinda. There's a whole divine science population in St. Louis with Herman Schrader, who was actually ordained a few months before Nona Brooks. So there was this geographic separation that created some of that proprietary activity, but it was also the desire to build population, and not unlike any other institutional church, to gain some financial grounding that would allow them to expand and grow further.
Right, in which they did quite well. All right, we have our last commercial break. It's going to be a very brief one. And then when we come back, finish up with Reverend Dr. Will Mercer with his book, Present at the Beginning. You can check it out at www.rocks presentatthebeginning.com. We'll be right back.
$1.3 million women are victims of physical assault by an intimate partner each year. According to the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, the majority of cases aren't reported to the police. Most people who are in an abusive relationship don't even know they're in one. The truth is, all abusive relationships boil down to one thing: control.
How do you like it? My new dress.
Are you out of your mind? You look like a prostitute. We're not going out with you dressed up like that in public.
But what am I supposed to wear?
Wear something decent. You can't wear that out in public. We're going to be late. Get back in there and pick a different outfit. I'm going to go run some errands. I'll be back in 30 minutes. Please be ready, okay?
Fine, I'll change. Fine.
Abuse is not always physical, leaving wounds that are visible on the outside. Emotional abuse is just as painful, only these wounds are hidden on the inside.
Are you out of your mind? You're crazy. You look like a prostitute.
Know that abuse is abuse, no matter what the form.
Look at me.
Oh my God, what's wrong with me?
Physical abuse scars the body,
I just wanted to love me.
but mental abuse scars the mind.
What you just saw was an example of a relationship that is emotionally abusive. Nobody has the right to tell you how to dress or how to act. If someone really cares for you, they won't tear you down. They will build you up.
How do you like it?
Wow. You look great. Fantastic. But then again, you look great all the time.
Thank you. I was hoping you'd like it. It's my new dress. I bought it just so we could go out tonight.
You look stunning.
Thank you. But I think I'm going to take a sweater just in case it gets cold tonight.
Great idea. I'm going to take one too. Let's go.
All relationships are not perfect, but a healthy relationship is when two people bring out the best in each other and have each other's good in mind. Take your time to know someone instead of rushing into something. It is better not to involve yourself with an abusive person than to try and get out of a domestic violence situation.
If someone is abusive to you and you need help, please call the Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-SAFE. That's 1-800-799-SAFE. They have highly trained experts available 24/7 who will speak with you confidentially and offer information regarding the unhealthy aspects of your relationship, resources, or immediate support for victims to find safety and live lives free of abuse. Domestic violence affects us all.
It affects us all.
Nos afecta a todos.
It affects us all.
모두에게 영향을 줍니다.
Che ci ricarte tutte.
It affects us all.
Domestic violence.
We are at the Madhouse TV studios in Deer Park, Long Island. I am joined with the Reverend Dr. Will Mercer, who wrote Present at the Beginning, which I believe is destined to become a New Thought classic because he talks about the foundations of New Thought, the teachers back in the day in the late 1800s. And it's just really, just absolutely fantastic. What's next for you? You've written this book, now what? Are you going to travel around the country and teach it, or what are you going to do?
Well, I'd love to do that.
Okay.
I guess Deer Park is my first stop.
Perfect.
But to be quite honest with you, there was material that became known to me in the process of completing this book that has gotten me on the road to writing the second book.
Ooh, give us some tidbits.
Well, I'll give you kind of a teaser.
A teaser. That's what we want, a teaser.
Melinda Kramer in 1894 and 1895 in her Harmony magazine created a record of herself. And that's what we call it in Divine Science, Record of Myself. It's been published as a little booklet. It has a few editor's notes at the back of it, but it's basically just the two accounts that talk about how her healing began in 1885 and so on. Up until now, that's all we had. She was the editor of her own magazine, so everything was very tightly edited, very carefully edited, words carefully chosen. She happened to travel to Washington, D.C. in late 1905, or excuse me, early 1905, and spent about 6 weeks with the Evangelical Christian Science Church of Washington, D.C.,
Okay.
which was, again, a breakaway church from the Mary Baker Eddy movement.
Oh.
But she was invited to teach and speak. So she had 2 lectures, and this is somewhat the way the circuit worked. You would have a couple of lectures, you would offer a couple of free classes in the afternoon, here and there, and over a course of 6 weeks, then by the second week, she could be offering full classes to literally 200 and 300 people for her primary and her normal classes. Well, the other activity that she freely engaged in was what they called testimonial meetings, where people who were really leading metaphysicians in Washington related to a man named Bishop Sabin, who was her host, and others who spoke about their healing experience. In the process of doing that, she creates an extemporaneous presentation of her story that no one's ever heard before.
Nice.
So that's going to be coming out along
Very
with
good.
some other material.
That's terrific. I want people to know that they can go to www.Present at the Beginning, and you can get your copy of this fantastic book. And what my takeaway from the book was how strong and powerful people's awareness of their oneness with God. That's really, really strong throughout this book. That's another reason I think this book is destined to be a classic in the New Thought movement. And so, we just have a little bit of time left. We spoke briefly about meditation before. Another key component of New Thought is affirmative prayer. It's called spiritual mind treatment. How would you describe that briefly? We have about a minute or two.
Well, spiritual mind treatment, or scientific prayer as Divine Science would call it, and very similar to what Unity does, is moving away from the prayers of supplication, which are asking God to produce something that you don't have.
Or begging God.
Or begging, groveling.
Right.
But indeed, affirming that as a child of God, you have the right to demand your good. Emma Curtis Hopkins says, there is good for me and I ought to have it.
Right.
And that's a key component in this whole concept of affirmative prayer.
Right.
That we talk to God about what it is we know that God is sending our way. And then we simply wait for the manifestation, which may not be the red car when we wanted, we get a green car when we wanted a red car, but we get a car. It may not be perfect parking as one person would define it, but as another person might define it. The idea is that whatever happens in our lives is in divine order. And the result is that we have that kind of affirmative approach. And quite frankly, you know this as well as I do, the greatest affirmative prayer ever written is the Lord's Prayer. No one asks for anything in the Lord's Prayer. Give us.
Right.
Forgive us. It's not saying, please, God,
No.
do this or that.
We had Rocco Errico on, and one of the big revelations he made is in Lord's Prayer, rather than lead us not into temptation, that it really translates into and let us not enter into. Yeah, we had him on the show. That was really exciting. So we have just really about a minute. Would you be willing to give us an affirmative prayer?
Sure.
Okay.
If we can all get centered and recognize that we are in the presence of God at all times. Heavenly Father, Mother God, thank you for this opportunity to share this time with Reverend Janine and with all of her followers. Thank you, God, for all the good that has already poured into our lives. Thank you, God, for all the continuing good that we know you will pour into our lives again and again. Thank you for our good health. Thank you for all the things that we need in life to be a success and to be acknowledged as a true child of God. Amen.
Amen. I like that because you did a thank you prayer, and what a wonderful, because I always say, my favorite expression is one that I thought of years ago, is that feeling is the fuel that propels thought into form. And so when you're doing a thank you prayer like that, you're really putting feeling into it. So that's wonderful. Please check out, get your copy of Present at the Beginning by going to www.presentatthebeginning.com. You also can buy the book on Amazon. And how do people get in touch with you if they want to get in touch with you?
They can go to presentatthebeginning.com and they'll find my telephone number there as well as mailing address.
Perfect. So then we can easily get in contact with you. Good. And I want the people to know that at the end of the show, we roll credits. And when you roll the credits at the end, what you actually see is a list of New Thought centers and New Thought organizations that you can contact so you can find out more about New Thought. I want to let you know that next week we have Reverend Bonnie Barnard. She wrote Qualities of Being. Fantastic book. We also have Dr. Frank Zalmalin. The following week we have Michael Posner. We have Barbara Gold-Branson coming up with her book on soulmates. So we have a lot of fantastic shows coming up. I'd like to thank so much the Reverend Dr. William Mercer for joining us on Spirituality Rocks.
Oh, thank you for inviting me again.
Yeah, it was wonderful. I really, really enjoyed your book. And so I admonish you to remember that the presence and power of God seeks to express in you, through you, and as you. Get busy with your affirmative prayer, practice meditation, and then you can truly live a rewarding, productive, and peaceful life. And that is why spirituality rocks.
Amen.